right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm gonna give it another minute to let folks join. Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to our virtual crabber workshop of 2026. Super exciting time with the crabbing season approaching, opening up on July 2nd throughout much of the Puget Sound and other areas coming up soon. My name's Haley Sherman. I'm the program coordinator for the Northwest Straits Foundation, who's hosting this event. We are a nonprofit organization working to protect and restore marine resources of the Puget Sound region. We do this through restoration projects, marine debris cleanup, such as derelict fishing gear removal, and a whole lot more. Before I introduce our presenters with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, I'd like to give a brief intro on why we are here. Over 10,000 crab pots are lost in the Puget Sound every year. These lost pots continue to capture and kill Dungeness crab and degrade the marine habitat they sit on. The most common cause of lost gear is actually user error. So our goal is to provide you with the information needed to keep your gear safe and have a successful crabbing season. Lost crabbing gear is a local and regional problem, as shown through our derelict crab pot removal efforts over the years. As an example, I'm just going to highlight some of the work that we did in 2025. Last year, we removed 78 derelict crab pots from the Maury Island Aquatic Reserve, 113 derelict crab pots from Port Gardner in Everett, 132 derelict crab pots from Port Townsend Bay, and 89 crab pots from Dungeness Bay. These are all examples of the work we're doing each year cleaning up lost fishing gear throughout the region. I'd also like to thank our funders for these projects and this workshop, including the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, NOAA Marine Debris Program, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Martin Foundation. Okay, now that I've introduced myself and our organization, let's get started with the program. For this workshop, we ask that you submit all your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Due to the amount of attendees, we will not be using the raise hand or chat feature. All questions should be directed to that Q&A function. We will read aloud your questions to the presenters, and I may even answer some by typing in the answers. There will be time about halfway through this workshop and in the last 10 minutes for questions and answers. And the last thing I'll do before I introduce our speakers is I'd like to point you to our website, catchmorecrab.org, where you can find important information on how to be a successful crabber. And if you'd like to make a donation to support our work, you may do so by clicking on the donate button at the top of our screen, which is located on all of our web pages. To find helpful resources on our Catch More Crab webpage, you can navigate there by simply going to catchmorecrab.org, or from our homepage, go to the derelict gear removal drop-down page and select Catch More Crab. As you scroll down the page, you will first find a checklist of things to do in your planning and prep before you hit the water. I'll let it catch up here. Next, you'll find instructional videos with demonstrations on how to implement the guidelines in our checklist above. And then lastly, we've compiled a list of web resources and phone apps that will help you along the way. All of the resources we've provided will help be your guide in being successful and responsible crabber. Okay, so I'll stop sharing and then I will introduce our speakers before they start. Okay, our speakers today are Don Velasquez and Caitlin Bosley with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We will begin with Don and Caitlin presenting on Puget Sound crab management. Don holds degrees from Oregon State University and University of Washington. His graduate work involved optimizing aquaculture conditions for juvenile geoduck clams, and he has worked with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife since 1993. His early work at Department of Fish and Wildlife was with intertidal clam and oyster enhancement, and since 1995, he has been working primarily with crab and shrimp fisheries in Puget Sound. Caitlin Bosley serves as the Puget Sound Crustacean Program Lead for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, overseeing management of state recreational and commercial crab and shrimp fisheries in the Puget Sound, and supervising a team of biologists and technicians that engage in fishery monitoring, surveys, and research. She received her MS and PhD in fishery science from Oregon State University, where she studied age, growth, and population dynamics of burrowing shrimp in Oregon and Washington estuaries. She then spent 3 years working with NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service, modeling marine fish populations before making the jump to Puget Sound crustaceans in 2019. Okay, I can see your screen. Awesome.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, great. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm happy to be here. I've done this workshop one or two other times. It's just a really great opportunity to share some of the important information about the upcoming crabbing season, so you can be a responsible crabber and hopefully catch more crab, as Haley said. So we're going to cover a range of topics this evening. Let's see, I can advance here. Yep. So crabbing workshop. So we'll cover a range of topics this evening over the hour. I'll start with an introduction of just general management practices and principles for the Dungeness crab and other crab fisheries in Puget Sound. We'll cover some of our recreational rules, talk about how the methods that we use and how, the conservation allocation principles behind them. Talk about the upcoming season, which starts on Thursday this week, and about some of the reporting and recording requirements for Dungeness crab harvest in Puget Sound. And then I'll turn it over to Dawn to talk more about the general equipment that's used for crab harvesting and some of those details about maximizing your success. Okay. All right, so there's 3 species of Dungeness crab that you'll be likely to encounter if you're crabbing in Puget Sound. The most common one and the most well-known one is the Dungeness crab, which is shown on the left here. It's a very popular fishery and well-known, and you'll see that this species is widely available in restaurants and, gosh, all over. It's a very coveted and delicious species. Also, the red rock crab you'll encounter often if you're crabbing in the Puget Sound, and in some areas, red rock crab is more prevalent than other. You are allowed to keep this, and it has a different set of regulations than Dungeness crab that we'll talk about. And then a lesser known one is the Tanner crab, which is allowed to be retained. It typically is in deeper water and also has its own set of regulations as well. Okay, so just going over some of the license requirements and background on our state recreational crab fishery, specific to the Dungeness crab fishery. In order to harvest Dungeness crab in Puget Sound, it requires to have a shellfish license, a Puget Sound crab endorsement, and a catch record card. Each year, the department sells approximately 220,000 endorsements to allow harvest of Dungeness crab. So that's quite a lot of people that are participating in this fishery from year to year. One of the other requirements that we have is that all the crab that are caught need to be recorded on a catch record card. We have 2 different seasons. We have a summer fishery and a winter fishery. These are set up as 2 different reporting periods. So you have a separate catch record card that's issued for each of those 2 seasons. So summer CRC, which is valid from July 1st through Labor Day each year in the areas that are open, and then a winter CRC, which you can receive after the middle of August, and then that is valid after Labor Day through the end of December. We do have a new tool that's coming online this year. It's an electronic catch record card. It's called an eCRC, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is going to be like. In addition to recreational Dungeness crab fisheries, we also have pretty broad scale state commercial fisheries. It's a small pool of licensed commercial fishers that participate in Puget Sound. We have a total of 248 active licenses. We have a number of different boats, and each boat is allowed to have up to 3 licenses on a boat. We have a 100 pot limit per license. And this season is only open in it's primarily fall, winter, and early spring fishery. We typically open it in early October, and depending on the area and the amount of quota that's available, it can extend into as late as April, but typically it closes sooner than that. And the bulk of it is happening at the tail end of our recreational fishery or after our recreational fishery has closed. In general, the Dungeness crab fishery in Puget Sound is recreational priority. And so the recreational fishery goes first. We are able to calculate the amount of crab that was caught in the recreational fishery, and the remaining pounds are available to the commercial fishery after the summer and winter fishery seasons are already planned. It's a small boat and live market fishery. So our commercial fishermen are selling to local markets and overseas as a live product. So it's very highly valuable. All right, so there's a lot of different management areas in the Puget Sound. It's complex geography, and we co-manage with the treaty tribes, which are dispersed throughout the extent of the region. We have 8 different management regions, which are shown here on this graph. They're numbered 1 through 7, and you can see sort of the distribution of the management areas throughout the region here. The regions 1 and 3 are an area where we have both recreational and commercial fisheries. And 2 and 2 East, we split the total amount of catch and harvest between recreational and commercial fisheries. Regions further to the south, which include the Hood Canal, region 4, 6, and 7, which is basically Seattle down into South Sound. Those are recreational priority or recreational only areas. Their commercial fishing for the state is not allowed, but in all of the areas that are shown here, the treaty tribes exercise commercial fisheries and CNS as well. The bulk of their fisheries are through the commercial fishery. And these regions that are shown here are primarily how we manage our quota system. But our catch reporting system on catch record cards and our regulations are aligned with our Puget Sound recreational marine areas. And so now that I've added the second graph on the right, you'll see the numbered areas, geographic boundaries. Those are the marine areas. On the left are the crab management regions. Those are our quota and management areas. In some cases, they overlap and align entirely. In other areas, they do not. There's a misalignment. So this table here is showing how those areas align. So the region 1 quota area overlaps with the marine area 7, which is the San Juan Islands. The 2 East and 2 West represent the 8182 and Admiralty Inlet 9 area, marine area. All of these marine areas out on the Straits, that is the region 3, goes all the way out to the ocean. And then the recreational priority areas are going to be marine area 10, 11, 13, and 12. And those are overlapping with the exception of a small portion of the marine area 9 north of the Hood Canal Bridge that is considered to be different in the region 5, so a different management region. But in the catch reporting for recreational harvest, it will be reported in marine areas. Don, feel free to butt in if I'm missing anything.
No, you're doing good.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so this graph here is showing the state and tribal harvests of Dungeness crab going back to 1992 in millions of pounds. The state harvest is shown in the orange here, and the tribal total harvest is shown in the blue. And we share, the state and the tribes, they co-manage this resource. We have a court mandate through the Rafidi decision that reaffirmed treaty rights to shellfish harvest in Washington state. So we have to manage these. So we get half on the state side and the tribes get half on the tribal side. And that was first enacted in 1994. And so what this graph is showing that since the Rafidi decision in 1994, both the state and the tribes have been working to achieve equal harvest, so 50-50 harvest. And it didn't take very long after the Rafidi decision was announced that the state and the tribes were able to achieve that 50-50 sharing. And then if you go all the way over to the more recent years in 2024, you can see that the fishery between the state and the tribes has been quite stable for a while, for quite a number of years now, and we're very effective at reaching that equal allocation. In 2015 was the peak harvest of Dungeness crab in Puget Sound. And since that time, it's come down just a little bit. And some of that can be explained by some areas that are closed now due to some reduced abundances in the South Sound and portions of the Hood Canal. Okay. So we manage 50-50 with the tribes, and then within our 50%, we manage between the state recreational and the state commercial. So this is that same time series going back to the early 1990s. The blue bar is showing our commercial harvest overall, and this maroon color is showing the overall recreational harvest. And in 2011, the agency enacted a new policy, which we're operating under to this day, and that set a recreational priority for Dungeness crab harvest in Puget Sound. So it defined our season structure as it is now with a summer season and a winter season. It put the priority on the recreational harvest, and then anything that happens, any of the available quota after the state recreational fisheries take place, that goes to the commercial fishery. And since that policy, very sensitive. Since that policy was enacted, we quickly got into an increase of recreational harvest, about a 50-50 balance between commercial and recreational. But since about 2018, there's been a number of different areas where the abundance of crab has gone down, and we've enacted management or conservation closures to help protect the resource. And these arrows here are showing what areas were closed in what years. So in 2018, we had closures in marine areas 11, 2018, and 2019. It's since open for a smaller scale recreational fishery. And since 2019, the south end, south of Ayoc Point in the Hood Canal, has remained closed due to low abundance of Dungeness crab. And similarly, in 2018, we closed the South Sound Marine Area 13, and we continue to monitor those areas to look for signs of recovery, and it hasn't improved to the point where we've felt comfortable opening it yet. And so we've had reduced recreational opportunities in those areas since 2018. Okay. So here's just a schematic about how the total sharing and allocation works out with the state and treaty fisheries. So our total pie is the amount of quota that the co-managers work together. We review information on test fishing. We review fishery performance from the previous year. We set a total amount of quota that we're going to target in a certain year. And then half of that goes to the tribes and half of that goes to the state. And the tribes are responsible for managing their own fishery, and most of it is done in commercial and a smaller scale ceremonial and subsistence fishery. On the state side, we allocate between the commercial and the recreational. Prior to the recent fishery closures in some of the management regions, it was about a 50-50 allocation. You saw that on the graph prior. Since those closures, a little bit more is taken on the commercial side because the commercial fishery is only operating in the areas that are have the greatest abundance and strongest amount of resource up to the north in the San Juan Islands and the Strait. Okay. Okay, so that's how we set up our defining of our quotas and structuring who gets to take what when. But underlying that, at all the different parties that are harvesting pretty much throughout the West Coast, they use a conservative management framework called the 3S management framework. And the 3 S's stand for size, sex, and season. So for the Dungeness crab fishery and all crab fisheries, pretty much, there's a minimum legal size. The crab has to be a certain size in order for it to be legally harvested. In Puget Sound, it's 6¼ inches. And waiting this till the crab has grown to that size allows the crab to have multiple years of reproduction before it gets harvested. So it's really good for the resource. It allows there to be that reproductive capacity and still be able to have harvest. The second S is the sex. So we have a size selective fishery and a sex selective fishery. So we're only selecting the males. The females are the ones that produce the eggs. By not harvesting females, it again allows for the reproductive capacity of the population to be retained. And so harvesting only large males and only males just is a conservative and helps in maintaining stability and sustainability of the resource. And then finally, season, that's the third S, and that is because that we set up our fishery seasons to target crab when they're in hard shell condition. Through their growth, in order to grow, they molt their exoskeleton. They have to reform their skeleton, and when they do that, it goes through a soft shell condition, and it takes a period of time for it to go back into a hard shell condition. So we don't want to have fisheries operating during this vulnerable stage where they're molting and are in a soft shell condition. So by structuring our fishery to avoid that period, it reduces bycatch mortality. It also allows the fishers to harvest a higher quality and more valuable product because it's in hard shell. The animal is full of meat and it's heavy and it's a high quality product. So 3S management, size, sex, and season. Okay. And for the size limit in Puget Sound, it's 6¼ but other areas in the West Coast have different size limits. So when you're going out and harvesting, make sure that you're checking your regulations and making sure that you're targeting the right size for the area that you're in. So 6¼ in Puget Sound. In order to properly measure the crab, you can find at local stores, you can contact us. We have these crab gauges here, which is shown in the picture. And in order to measure them properly, you're measuring on the inside of the outer points here. So not including the points, but on the inside, trying to get to the 6¼ and most of these gauges have multiple notches to represent the different size limits for the different areas. We've seen lots of people attempt to do the measurement using tools that are not this gauge, like for instance, a dollar bill or a measuring tape or some sort of ruler. That's not an accurate way to do the measurement, so we recommend using these crab gauges. Okay, and here's a picture of what that looks like with somebody doing the measurement there. And this is a legal crab. You don't want to be able to get that gauge over the crab inside the points. Okay, so males only. This is a pretty easy to distinguish characteristic. If you flip the crab over and look at its abdomen, there's this structure here. This is the abdomen. It's like the tail of the lobster, but imagine it's flapped in and laying on the underside of the crab. The males have this abdomen shape is kind of triangular and long and narrow. It's very distinctive. It's hard to miss. And the females have this more dome shaped. And so when you flip it over, if it has this female, their bodies tend to be a little bit more round. And then it's got this flap. This is what it uses to hold its eggs in during that egg bearing period. So the females you cannot keep, keeping only males. And then that's what that structure looks like. We have lots of pictures and figures online to be able to help people to be able to find out if they've got a male or female crab. Here's a picture of what a female looks like bearing eggs. And those, you'll see crabs, female crabs potentially going into pots in the mid-fall, around November timeframe. Okay, so going back to the season structure, we avoid our seasons are planned to avoid that molting period where they're shedding their exoskeleton, they're reforming their shell, they're growing into this new shell. If you are harvesting a soft shell, it has poor or low meat quality. The handling mortality is very high. So if you grab a crab and you squeeze it and it's soft, definitely recommend you're not allowed to retain it. You're only allowed to retain hard shell crab. And if you do catch soft shell crab, place it carefully back into the water, because any sort of like throwing it from a boat or any sort of impact can increase the chances of mortality. We do have some techniques to show how to determine whether or not a crab is in the soft shell or hard shell condition. If you flip the crab over on its back, and you can see in this image here, you push its first walking leg, its claw forward, and then pressing underneath the carapace. And we like to call this the armpit of the crab. And if it's soft or crunches or it has some softness, it's going to be too soft to keep. You want to be able to feel firmness there, very firm when you're squeezing to make sure that it's in hard shell condition. If it's in soft shell, it's going to be light in color. It's going to be light in weight. If it's in hard shell, it's going to be darker in color. It might have some epifauna on it, and they tend to be often heavier. Anything I missed there, Don, that you want to chime in on?
No, and just that, there could be a slight give to what would be deemed a legal crab, 1 to 2 millimeters. But if that shell where that thumb is in the lower picture, pop cans in, obviously like a pop can with just standard pressure on your thumb, that's too soft. It's going to have all those poor characteristics, poor meat quality, not filled out, not enough meat in the shell for someone to be happy with that crab.
Yep. All right. So the red rock crab fishery is open at the same time as the Dungeness crab. It has a little bit different regulations than Dungeness crab, and so we just wanted to highlight those differences. You can keep and retain, you can keep, catch and keep red rock crab. There is a minimum legal size of 5 inches. So where this Dungeness crab is 6 1/4, it's a bigger crab. It's 5 inches for red rock crab, and that's measured in the same way. So it's the widest point of the shell. The crab gauge that you get may have a mark for 5 inches, or red rock crab specifically. So you're measuring inside the widest points, just as you would for the Dungeness crab. One of the main differences between the regulations for red rock crab and Dungeness crab is that you can keep both males and females that are over 5 inches. And so this graph, these photos here are showing the difference in what the male and the female would look like. So anything that's over 5 inches you can keep. It's very, very rare to find females that are that size. It's quite common to find males that size, but it's very rare to find females. So not a lot of female crab are being caught and retained. Same situation where you have to release the soft shell crab. Same concerns there with just poor meat quality, greater handling mortality of soft shell crabs. And another notable difference is that there's a daily limit of 6. And for the Dungeness crab, the daily limit is 5. And for red rock crab, the daily limit is 6. There's no CRC or recording requirement for Dungeness crab. You simply need a shellfish license. You don't need to have a catch record card and return your catch reports with red rock crab.
I think the important thing there is currently is the word.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
We don't know what the future holds.
Mm-hmm. There may be a time where we do require a recording of red rock crab harvest, but not at this time. And then finally, the Tanner crab fishery. Again, it's open at the same time as Dungeness crab. So when we open a crab fishery, it allows harvest of Dungeness crab, red rock crab, and Tanner. Tanner crab is very rare to find. It typically is in deeper water and in very specific areas in Puget Sound. It also does not require an endorsement or a catch record card to harvest. And the regulations are similar to red rock crab in that both males and females can be retained. And you're measuring the disc size, the carapace size is 4.5 inches. So its body is very small, but its legs are quite long. And it's a small size limit there. And males and females are allowed to be retained. Again, this is very, very rare. The daily limit is 6 for Tanner crab. All right, so just last couple weeks ago, actually, we announced our summer recreational seasons for this upcoming year. We open most areas this Thursday on July 2nd. So the marine areas 4, 5, and 6, which are out on the Strait, that's going to open starting on Thursday this week. It's open 5 days a week, Thursday through Monday. It's closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And that season will carry on through September, through Labor Day, which is September 7th this year. 8-1, 8-2, 9 will all have that same season. So opening a Thursday this week and then staying open till Labor Day. The San Juan Islands have different seasons. Because of soft shell conditions for the crab populations up there, we open those fisheries later. So we'll have mid-July for 7 South. And then 7 North, we don't know when that season will begin. It will be pending additional test fishing and shell condition tests for that area. So an announcement will come probably in the next few weeks there. In the areas that we have limited or shortened fisheries, so marine areas 10 and 11, we open only 2 days a week. So that's Sunday and Monday. And where we have a more shortened season due to a lower quota this year. And so in Marine Area 11, we'll be closing in mid-August and then just opening. No, we have a full season in Marine Area 10 going through Labor Day, but again, only open on Sundays and Mondays. The Hood Canal, it has a standard season with the exception of that lower portion of the canal, which is closed and has remained closed since 2018. And so these seasons and areas are all available on our website. And so you can navigate there to make sure that you're in the right area and harvesting on an open day. Okay, so we've got a couple new things happening this year with the catch record cards, and I just want to spend just a little bit of time making sure that folks are familiar with these new changes. So just an overview, the catch record card and the licensing to harvest Dungeness crab in Puget Sound. You need to have a shellfish combination or package license. Often people buy the Get Outdoors package or the Fish Washington package that you can get the catch record card and Puget Sound crab endorsement as part of that. We have the separate summer and winter season. So you'll see that summer would be clearly denoted on your catch record card. The rules are that you need to record your crab immediately on retention. So if you're out there crabbing, you bring up your crab pot, you put your crab in your bucket, say you have 3 crabs, those 3 crabs get marked on your catch record card. And the information that goes on there along with that catch is the marine area that you're in, the month and day of harvest, and then you make check marks for each of the crab that you keep up to the daily limit of 5. And then you just keep this as a running tally for all your trips throughout the summer. And then after the season closes on Labor Day this year, then we open what's called the reporting period. And so you have a month essentially, it's 3 weeks this year after the summer season to report your catch. And so you can mail in your paper card. We also open an online portal where people can log on to their wild account and enter in the catches on their cards. And then there's a mail and you can drop it off at a local WDFW office or you can drop it in the mail. If you do not return your card, you will receive a $10 penalty for failure to report, and that will be applied to your purchase of your next year's license. So this is what the paper catch record card looks like. This is what you would be familiar with for folks that have done this before. This year, available just this season, the agency has now rolled out a mobile ECRC platform. So it's an application that you're allowed to purchase your licenses, but also report your catch and carry all of your licenses and active privileges on an app on your phone. So this is what the paper license looks like. Oh yeah, and so a couple other rules. Regardless if you have paper or your mobile license, you have to carry that with you while you're fishing. If you get stopped and checked by enforcement, they'll be looking for you to have this license or be able to view it on your phone if you have it on the application. The agency does not reissue a license for a card that's been lost or damaged. You'll have to purchase a new one, and you can do that at a dealer. And yeah, so we have the reporting periods. And one of the important things here is that even if you don't catch and keep crab, and you have no catch recorded on your catch record card, you still need to report that zero catch to the agency. So a 0 is still a number. So if you haven't caught anything, we still want to know that. Please send in your report or send in your cards. For more information on the catch record card, paper catch record card system, you can scan this QR code or visit our website. The new reporting tool is on 2 different applications. We have launched a My DFW and a Fish Washington application that allows catch reporting. So you can go to a dealer and elect to be a mobile customer. When you are a mobile customer, you'll be able to download the application, log into your account, and view all of your licenses on the application. That's what this is showing here on the picture on the top left. You can select and add your catch record card, and when you do that, you will be able to view your catch record card and add catch. And so this lower picture here shows what it looks like. You would have a drop down for where you would enter your marine area. It automatically records the day of harvest, and then you would have 5 check boxes where you would mark the catches for that day in the similar fashion as with a paper card. The nice benefit of this is that it allows crabbers to do the recording and reporting in one step, because when you enter your catches onto this electronic catch record card, the data becomes available immediately to the biologists with the department. So we can track what's going on in season and be able to get our catch estimates in a more timely manner to be able to more effectively manage this fishery. So it's a useful tool, and we're looking forward to see how it goes this year. Similarly, if you don't go crabbing at all, you still need to report your catch. You will get a notice at the end of the season just to verify that you did not go crabbing if you didn't enter any catch reports on your electronic catch record card. Okay, just wanted to share again that it's important to report even if you did not catch any crab. So what this graph here is showing that the percentage of people that report their catch and the number of crabs that are on those catch record cards. This is from summer only, and you'll see that over almost 50% of people don't actually go crabbing at all. And so it's important that we get that information as well as get the information for all those that are successful. And some people are very successful, actually. And so it's good to know that too. Okay, I think that's pretty much it for at least the general management and harvest rules and regulations. So I'm going to pass it off to Don here to talk about some other things that are important for the crab fishery.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. We have a couple notable items for this 2026 recreational crab season. As Caitlin mentioned, licenses are now available online through the My WDFW app, which is the same app you would be able to do the electronic catch recording. And also, interestingly, for hunters, they'll be able to record their harvest on hunts on that application. And you can also get it at the licensed dealers as before. Again, you'll be printed or given the ability to print a paper copy of your catch record card. I don't think any of the licensed dealers have any of the plasticized paper that licenses and catch record cards were printed on previous to this year. So be prepared to protect your licensed and catch record card um, uh, so that it doesn't get destroyed because it's not going to be in plasticized paper. There are some new fishing closure zones that affect crabbers and shrimpers at Washington State Ferry terminals. Um, that was put in place last year in, I believe, September. So that rule is in effect, and I'll go into some details on that. And we have some crab tagging going on this year from various fishery managers. Those tags are going out in different areas of Puget Sound, and I'll give you some details about that project and how to report information on those tag crab. And then just be aware that similar to past years, specifically last couple of years, sampling staff will be interviewing recreational crabbers at marinas, ramps, um, to collect biological information and get compliance data. So just be aware that it's very likely that those people that you've seen the last couple of years at certain locations in Puget Sound will be there again this year. And actually, there'll be more locations involved in the sampling this year. Next slide. This is just some more information about that ferry zone, ferry terminal closure zones. There are 19 different zones, Washington State Ferry terminals, where these closure zones will be in place. The zones are depicted there. They're 100 yards either side of the ferry terminal dock and 400 yards out in front of the ferry terminal docks. The only exception is the Coopville Ferry Terminal, which that is 100 yards either side and 800 yards from the front of the terminal dock. So it's a slightly larger zone. Just be aware that you cannot set shrimp or crab gear in those zones, and that is new as of September of last year. Next slide. Like I said, we've been tagging crabs last couple years now. We did have a project, I believe it was back in 2002 through about 2007, where we did some of this tagging out in Hood Canal and the Strait. Now the state and treaty tribes are tagging crabs in other areas of Puget Sound. And so if you get a tag crab, and there's pictures on this slide, they're long, thin plastic tags. They're attached right at the suture line. That's the line where the shell splits when crab molt, and those tags tend to be retained through the molt. And so if you get one of those crab, you capture a crab, you see it has a tag there. Note the date, the tag number, and the location where you caught the crab. And then there's a phone number on that tag where you can call or text that number and contact someone, and then you will be asked to report the date, tag number, and location for that crab that you caught. If it's a legal male crab, there's nothing else that's been done to it. You can keep it and harvest it like you would any other legal male Dungeness crab. If it's a sublegal male or female, we're asking you to release, note all that information, but then release it right away. And then you won't be legally at risk because you released your crab right away, but you at least noted the tag number, date, and location and can report that to the treaty managers. And we'll be using that as part of a study to describe local crab movements in these marine areas. The tagging so far has been done in marine areas 8, 9, 10, and 12, but more tagging is planned. So again, pay attention to the tag number, date, and location, and that's the kind of information we need. Next slide. Some other good sources of information about the crab fishery are the new 2026-27 sport fishing rules pamphlet that just came out, I think, this last week, and that's effective July 1. And if you go to our website and go to that location there, which is on the website, it'll take you to the PDF copy of the new regulation pamphlet. If you want to see the Dungeness crab regulations and seasons on the website as well at that location, we have a downloadable Puget Sound crabbing brochure. It's a PDF format. It's the same brochure that some of our partners that are trying to educate recreational crabbers are distributing at the boat ramps, and you can download and print that from our website. More information on Dungeness catch cards there. There's some good information on the European green crab, which we won't go into detail here, but if you want to learn more about the threat that particular invasive crab poses, you can go there and find out the latest also about where it's been detected. And obviously the Northwest Straits, Haley already mentioned the Northwest Straits website. That's a good location to learn about what the Northwest Straits is doing with regards to Dungeness crab and derelict gear. And of course, you can always find some more information on the Fish Washington application, which was mentioned earlier. I guess we're ready for the first group of questions.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, just a reminder, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We do have a few. If I don't answer them live or they're not answered live, I may have typed in an answer, so you can go back and look. Just a heads up. Okay, first question may already have been answered, but are commercial and Native American fishermen required to report all harvests?
Do you want to go, Don, or you want me to? I'm fine. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So good question. I probably glazed over this for the commercial fishery. It is required to report all catch on fish tickets, commercial fish tickets. The agency launched an application called WATIX a couple years ago. It's an electronic tool that our fleet has been using now with great success. So all commercial landings need to be reported both on the state and the tribal side. They are required to do fish tickets as well. They manage their commercial data separately than ours. We have two different data systems for that, but they all do need to be reported. They for their CNS and ceremonial and subsistence, each tribe has their own way of dealing with their catch reports, similar to our catch record curve system. So everything needs to be reported and accounted for.
Awesome. And this also may have been answered, but if you want to add anything, can a citation be given for harvesting a soft-shelled yet otherwise legal crab?
I'll take that one.
For that one.
Yeah. I've talked to our enforcement team, and that's not a high priority item for citations. It is primarily an item. It is a rule. It's primarily an education piece to educate the recreational crabber about the downside of harvesting a soft-shell crab. That said, there have been citations given, I believe, particularly when there are multiple violations or egregious violations. Enforcement reserves the right to be able to ticket you, I guess, for soft shell. But generally, where it's just a casual, okay, this crab is borderline soft shell, you've done everything else right, they take that as an outreach and education opportunity.
Awesome. Next question, would it be a good idea to take a picture of a tagged crab?
Yeah, that is a great way to handle it. Hopefully the timestamp on your mobile device will also apply to that picture. And so then you capture the date and hopefully the tag number. And then all you have to do is make sure you're contacting the right phone number, which is also on the tag.
Mm-hmm.
If you catch a green crab, what should you do?
Caitlin, you want that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So if you catch a green crab or see one, there is a very comprehensive online reporting tool. They don't want you to kill it. They don't want you to remove it. They just simply want you to take a photo of it and upload it to this tool, provide the information about where it was, what the habitat was, the date, and a lot of the characteristics of the situation. And that's on the Sea Grant website, I believe. Yeah, I think maybe we have some stuff on our agency website, but while Don's going over the next stuff, I can drop it in the chat if you'd like, Haley, for folks to be able to get that information. But
and part of the reason why they don't have you kill it on site is the general public as a whole has a poor track record of identifying European green crab from other less common native crabs like the helmet crab, which are green and just not commonly encountered. So many helmet crabs have died because people have thought they were invasive green crab and they were killed.
So the next few questions actually pertain to our next segment that Dawn will be doing. So I'll leave those there for now and we'll get started on the next one.
Sounds
Okay.
good. I am going to switch my location here and then be ready.
Okay, can you see my screen? Yep, crab gear. Yep.
Okay, that's right. I can do this first before I switch location.
Yeah.
So there's obviously many different ways to participate in the recreational crab fishery. I'll go over some of them quickly here that are less common. The dip net in the picture in the upper left was commonly used when people weighed for crab in the intertidal, and they just simply made their own homemade gadgets that don't pierce the shell, because that's the rule. You can't pierce the shell. And that, the angry crab would clamp onto it, and then you'd be able to measure it and harvest it. Star Trap, which is in the top center photo, that's a device which, when you release tension on the line, it lays flat on the bottom. You put the bait in the center and only closes and folds up like a pyramid when you pull on the line and take it to the surface. Ring nets and star traps are categorized differently than crab pots, and they have different, requirements of them because they lay flat on the bottom. By another couple of less common ways to harvest crab, that's called a dip rake, that lower left. It's mainly to tease crab out of the sand. Dungeness crab really like sand habitat, and you can pick them up that way and then examine them to see if they were legal to keep. The crab hawk, that is a castable device. It's like a net that clamps shut on the crab, and you can cast it off of your standard fishing rod. It is commonly used out on the open coast and by people who, obviously don't have boats where they can go right to a good crab site. They just cast it from shore and wait for a crab to stumble in, going for the bait, and then it captures them and you reel it up. By far, the most common ways to capture recreational crab are the crab pots pictured on the right side of this screen. The commercial crab pot is typically heavier, typically round. It can have anywhere from 2 to 4 entrances. Uh, Crabs go into a number those entrances, the gated entrances, get trapped in the middle. Crab pots have to have a minimum of 1.5 inches mesh, and the smaller crabs, because of features of these crab pots, can go out through escape rings that are part of the design of them, and I can go into that a little bit more in the next slides. But the recreational crab trap that's probably the most common is it pictured in the lower right. Lower right, it's a square folding trap. It's very light by initial design. Many people will have to use weight to add to that trap to fish it effectively in some areas. And so I'll go into some of the features of those pot gear in the next few slides. Next slide. So this is a diagram that depicts some of the gear requirements for crab pots that are in place for Puget Sound and state of Washington recreational fishers. You're starting with number one. The crab buoy has to be half red, half white. If you're attaching multiple buoys to your recreational gear, they all have to be half red and half white. Your address has to be your full name and address, first, last, mailing address, has to be on the buoy and has to be legible. And all those pieces have to be there for it to be legal. But we find when we find non-compliant crab buoys is people put just a last name, or they put a couple people's names on it. There's only one name that could be on it, or it's not legible, or they just put a boat name. All those things have happened. They're all illegal. Always attach the buoys with the rounded end down toward the crab trap. And many people don't think about why that is, but these traps are placed in water which has currents and also has floating debris. And if you don't put the round end facing down, that creates more drag. It will pull the buoy under. If there's kelp floating by, it'll catch on that flat side and drag your trap off, depending on how much weight. So always put the round end down toward the trap. Sinking lines are always best. The rule is you're not allowed to have line which spools at the surface because it's floating. You either have to weight the line or use weighted line. By far, the preferred crab line, in my opinion, is 5/16 leaded crab line, sinking crab line. Minimize line drag. That's why I mentioned 5/16. Some people use larger diameter lines. That's pretty much overkill for most crab traps, particularly recreational. 5/16. You can even get away with a 1/4 inch on a lot of traps because they're just not that heavy to pull them up. 1/4 inch to 5/16 works for most applications. Use escape cord. It's required on crab traps, recreational crab traps, and commercial. It's a natural fiber cord that rots away and allows the crab to escape in various configurations, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And lastly, in the graphic in the center, the flag and staff can be any color, any design, be tasteful. It's just mainly to identify your crab traps specifically from the myriads of other recreational crab buoys out there from a distance. If you have a little, cartoon character on your flag and you see that from a distance, hey, that's my buoy. It's not somebody else's. Some other recommendations are listed on the right. You can't actually use empty containers as buoys. That's illegal. You need a foam a buoy designed for crabbing or shellfish pot fishing. Watch your pots if possible. Stay close if you don't have to go away. If you're right there, you can see a problem if it's going to happen, and you're more likely to not lose your gear. And then avoid setting traps in areas of high risk. Again, we already talked about the rule about not setting in the ferry landing zones. But there's other areas of high risk. Log tows go through some waters fairly frequently. A lot of boat traffic will round points. Be very mindful of those areas of high vessel traffic, and know your water depth. And know that your water depth needs to be adjusted for the tide height, depending on when you plan to pull your gear. All right, next slide. Don't forget these supplies. Current Washington Sport Fishing Rules pamphlet. The new one electronically just became available, so if you haven't seen it already, you can go on the website. A license pen and catch record card. If you use the paper option, you'll need that, and you'll need a way to protect your paper catch record card so it doesn't get wet or destroyed. If you're using the electronic app, make sure you can log into your application on your mobile device and make sure it's fully charged or that you have an extra power supply. I personally am going to use the electronic this year, and I'm scared of it running out of juice, so I'm going to bring an extra USB power supply for my phone. Gloves are a great thing for hauling gear if you don't have a pot puller, and for handling crab. Your hands are precious, especially if you're older and you want to protect them. So gloves are a good idea. A crab gauge, we mentioned that already, to measure for legal size on the different sizes of crab. Don't forget your bait. A lot of the common commercial baits are mackerel, sardines, salmon, clams, and squid. However, anyone who's recreationally crab knows that in a pinch, chicken, turkey, herring, those other things that might be more commonly available work very well, particularly in locations where crab are abundant. And you'll need a container. A lot of people, and I counted myself as one when I started crabbing, forgot that, hey, to keep your crab in nice shape, let's say you want to keep them alive until you get home. You want to bring probably a cooler with some wet seawater soaked towels or burlap and maybe some ice, and that will keep your crab in excellent shape until you get home to site processing. If you put them in a container full of water and don't aerate the bucket and you have 5 or 6 crab in there, that's the surest way to kill them on a hot summer day. So just giving you that heads up. All right, next slide. Tips to improve your catch. Over time, we've learned these things. If your entry gates, those are those wire gates on the pots that I'll show you in a moment, aren't heavy enough, sometimes they'll swing open in a strong current. An empty or an open gate will allow crab to come and go at will. That's not what you want when you're using a trap. Traps with ramps at the entry tunnels tend to retain crab better than those without ramps. A lot of the more common designs don't have ramps, and they still work fine. But if you want to retain crab over time, the designs with ramps at the entry tunnels do hold the crab longer. Always inspect your traps for holes or malfunctioning entry gates. We've learned that the hard way through test fishing, where we're constantly using the same gear to fish areas. You got to check those traps over because a malfunctioning trap means you've missed out on data or you've missed out on eating crab. Durable crab bait containers, which allow some feeding but don't allow bait to be removed. You don't want the crab to go in your trap, grab the bait, and run out the door when another crab's coming in through the gate. You want to secure it in some way, and those soft bait containers, mesh. If you have red rock crab in particular in the area, they'll rip right through it, and then you have no bait container. So something that's a little bit durable for in case you have those other crab species are the ones that can really tear into it, and something that won't move. And you want that bait container to be in the center bottom of your trap so the crabs have to come into the trap to feed. If they can sit on the outside and feed on it, they will. Check escape cord, change when needed. You don't want to have your catch escape because you just forgot to change your escape cord, which is a necessary piece of equipment on your trap. Be willing to try different depths. If you're not successful at shallower depths, be willing to go a little deeper. Try some different locations. And again, if you need to improve your bait, there's some options there that the commercial folks use. Again, when I recreationally crab, I honestly use what I have available at the time, and sometimes that's chicken, and it works. Next slide. These are some photos of our crab gear recovery program, where the Northwest Straits has been very good at assisting us with getting those traps that don't have buoys on the surface anymore. Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife every year goes out on the closed days of the fishery, Tuesdays and Wednesdays, primarily in the summer fishery, to remove the gear that's still on the water. A lot of this gear is derelict or lost gear. Some of this gear is probably gear that people are poaching on closed days. All that gear is removed. Next slide. How do traps become derelict? Traps are set too deep. Sometimes sedimentation at river mounts buries the trap and you can't pull it. Buoys and lines are struck by vessels, barges, and log rafts. You can get your buoys and lines tangled in trees that have been flushed out of rivers. That happens actually more than you think. Owners forget where they place them. That also happens more than you think. Tidal currents can pull your buoys down, and so people won't see them when they come back to retrieve them. People don't check their knots or line connections to the traps. Nothing identifies a Boy Scout faster than somebody who's done everything right and their trap's still attached to their line, and vice versa. If you don't know your knots, you'll just be pulling an empty line. And there's other things that are less common, like ice flows in the wintertime and malicious sabotage or cutting off of buoys. The next slide. This is a graphic which depicts the traps removed by those crab pot sweeps that WDFW does by year, 2018 through 2025. I would caution and say the volume of overall gear is probably not completely reflective of the gear lost that year. It also reflects the amount of effort that in that year that the department's been able to put toward removing the gear. But what you'll see is that there's a huge component of those bars that the recreational gear, it's recreational gear, but the buoys were marked incorrectly, not with all the legal information. And that's a huge problem with the gear that's recovered on these sweeps. Now, next slide. So what kind of gear is this recreational gear that's recovered on the sweeps? Over 75%, 76% is the square folding trap style. There are some round traps recovered, and then there's a variety of other non-standard trap styles that comprise the other quarter of what's out there. But I just realized that those percentages are wrong. It should be 24, 15, and 69, I believe. Yeah, there was an error on the slide. I apologize for that. And I will change that later. But the vast majority are indeed the square folding traps. Next slide. This is some examples of improper or illegal buoys attached to crab gear that have been picked up on the closed days. The photo on the far left shows an empty jug, not allowed, specifically called out as illegal. Remember I mentioned about attaching the buoys with the round side toward the trap. The second and third photos there show that the flat edges of the buoy arrangement are arranged toward the trap. High drag, the traps are going to get lost, particularly if it's a light trap, which most of those are. And in fact, the picture on the far right also shows a non-standard buoy. I don't even know why they use that square-shaped blue thing, but it's non-standard and it will not help you get your gear back. 79% of traps recovered on closed days have the buoys attached incorrectly or use illegal buoys. Next slide. Basically, if you don't add weight to those lighter trap designs, you're going to lose your gear and not have any crab. That's all this is saying. 58% of lighter traps recovered on closed days have no added weight. Next slide. So how can you prevent your gear from becoming lost? Know how it becomes lost. Know the tides, currents, and vessel traffic where you're setting your gear. Add weight to the lighter traps. Attach buoys correctly. Set the traps, counting for tidal depth changes. GPS mark your traps. Don't rely on your memory. And check all your knots and connections. And if you can do so, stay near the traps. Next. Maximizing escapement from lost traps. Escape cords required. It has to be incorporated in the trap to let crabs out if the pot is lost. And I'll go into that during the gear demonstration, since I got to move along here. Next slide. This is one slide that depicts where escape cords used, and you can see on the right half of the slide, there's an escape ring there, a minimum 4 1/4 inch escape ring that's required. There's 2 of them required of crab traps. And this lets out most of the sublegal males and most of the females. So the trap becomes a selective harvesting device for legal size males. But when that rot cord that's holding that ring in rots away, if that trap is lost, then the ring will fall down and then all crabs will get out. That's one way of doing it. Next slide. If you're holding that escape ring in the upper left of one of those folding crab traps, it's been shown through Northwest Straits experimental work that the crabs can actually get out quite easily as long as it's in the corner like is depicted on the picture on the left. Next slide. And then if you have a trap design that where the top lid is where the escape cord is attached, make sure that once the escape cord pops, like the picture on the right where it's intact, when that white cord dissolves, if you have attached some kind of bungee to the upper lid to pull that lid open, the crab will get out most easily, and that's very effective. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to switch locations and go into the gear demonstration portion.
I'll stop sharing.
It'll be just a moment while I set up the video here. Okay. I think everybody will see the gear at this point. Is that correct?
I can see you, Don.
Excellent. What I'll show first is this is a crab ring net. It's basically composed of two rings. It's commonly used off of fishing piers. And when this is fishing, both rings lay flat on the bottom, like this. And then once the line is pulled, it forms this basket and the crab fall to the center. You typically put your bait down at the bottom here, and you can lift the crab up and they stay in there long enough for you to store your crab and get your catch. One thing to note, if you're fishing ring nets or star traps, a lot of other details of pots aren't required. But if you leave it unattended, you better have your full name and address on the buoy, and even on a pier. And that's because they need to be able to identify who's fishing that gear. If you don't leave the gear unattended, this properly marked buoy is not required. Again, red and white, full name and address. This is probably the most common crab trap, which is the square folding style. Often these traps are connected to a 4-point harness to each corner of the trap. That just helps keep the trap level as you're pulling it up. Again, you'll notice with this design, here are the tunnels that allow the crab in. There are 4. Here are the escape rings, 2 required in the upper half of the pot. They allow most of the sublegal males and females to escape while it's fishing. And there's the bait cage container inside right here. Here is the escape cord on the top. 100% natural fiber, cotton, jute. If it's lost, this will separate. It will allow this top door to open up and crab can get out that way. Again, if you really want the crab to fully escape from this trap, I would add a little elastic hinge to this so that once the rot cord rots, this pops open. That is the most common style of recreational crab trap, the square folding. This style is more like the commercial crab traps. This is round. It usually has some added weight, rebar, or other components in the construction. This particular one has 2 tunnels. Here are the gates. It has a bait container hang in the middle. Again, escape rings here and here. Same function as the recreational. Rot cord is located on the bail door strap. If that rots away, this will fall off and that should pop open like that. You'll notice there's some elastic here on this hinge to pop this one open. As soon as that escape cord rots, it should go like that. One more style. This is an octagonal trap. The bait container is incorporated into the center. Again, there's 4 tunnels on this trap. See how they swing? They're one-way gates. If the current is strong, you could add weight to this gate hinge here so that it doesn't fly open in a current. You can see this trap has an added weight bar in the bottom, right here. There are escape rings on this, like before, required on all crab pots. And here the escape cord is here on the bail door. So if that rots, this should pop open like that, and all the crab should escape. One last thing I wanted to show you about buoys. You can use a setup like this, where you have multiple red and white buoys. and add some flotation to your trap. And you can attach the buoys in different ways to your main line, but I'm using a halibut hook here. But again, you want the round side down toward the trap so it doesn't catch on things that are floating on the surface. This is taller, has a personalized staff. It also makes it easier to grab it from a boat if they're coming by. Again, if you have your line and buoy all set up and coiled and ready to go, that's a good idea. I personally like to put loops in the end of my line to make it easy to attach. And I also put the length of the line on a tag, so I know exactly how much line is there. Nothing's worse than setting a pot with a line that's insufficient for the depths. Some other good things to have: setting gear, good set of gloves, waterproof like these. They're very helpful. They protect your hands. Again, durable bait containers. They come in different sizes. Sometimes you might have to perforate them yourself. The weights to add to the crab pots. You can get weights like this or even just standard rebar and then wire this into the corners of the trap. So for example, you have a trap like this one, you can take this weight here or something like it and wire it into the corners to add weight to this trap, or strap on rebar, whatever adds the amount of weight that you need to fish the site you're looking for. And rot cord. The last thing I wanted to talk about there is you can buy it in different sizes. Thread size 120 is the legal requirement. For sport crabbing, I like to use something smaller. This is thread size 30. It will rot away faster than thread size 120. If you have to buy the larger cord, it's usually provided in 3 strands. You can unwind the 3 strands and get your smaller cord that way. Again, it would just rot away faster, and you just have to change it a little bit more often, but at least you'd be assured that if you lost your trap, the crab would get out fairly soon. That's all I had for the gear demonstration.
Awesome. Thanks, Don. We do have quite a few questions in the
Okay.
Q&A. Thanks, folks, for hanging with us. I know we're a little over time, but hopefully we'll get through these. The first question, how can you catch crab without a boat? Dipping, hand net, pole star trap, are rules different on the shore?
When you're doing it by hand in any of those hand operated modes, you generally aren't leaving the gear unattended. So the whole marked buoy thing is not necessary. I have seen people anchor their boats and fish a ring net off their boat, but because they're right there and attending it, they don't have to leave it with a buoy floating. So that's legal. If you're using any of those other methods, you still have to record your catch immediately. That can be a challenge if you're waiting in the intertidal. When I wait for crab, I actually have my catch record card in my waders, and I just come inshore a little bit, mark my crab down every time I keep it, and then go back. If you're scuba diving, generally enforcement will let you get out of the water and get yourself situated before they hold you to marking down the crab. They'll give you some time to do that. And typically, most scuba divers will get all their crab when they're down and mark them as soon as they're on shore. Does that answer the question, or is that something else?
No, that answers the question.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you have any recommendations for location and depths to crab in Marine Area 11? This person has not had any luck in the last 2 years.
Well, first off, I'll say that sort of jives with the test fishing results from Marine Area 11. Uh, not not as abundant preseason as some of the areas to the north in general. Some of the sites that I know where they have caught Dungeness crab uh, in the past and where they test fish, Quartermaster Harbor is one that always comes to mind. Um, Tramp Harbor, Caitlin maybe can chime in. We did some department-based test fishing in Marine Area 11. And last time we were in Tramp Harbor, it was actually pretty good there. Is that correct, Caitlin?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. And there's just a lot of variability in Marine Area 11. So um, other than those two particular locations, um, I'm not aware of any super hot spots, at least when you compare it to areas further to the north in Marine Areas 8-1 or 7, for example.
Awesome. In past years, the combination license included a Puget Sound crab catch card. It looks like that changed this year, and the combo license doesn't give a crab catch card for Puget Sound. Is that correct?
There are different license types. The standard combination does not, uh, but the Get Outdoors and the Fish Washington license packages do. Is that correct, Caitlin?
Yeah, so this might be referencing to a change that we made. I think it's been a couple years ago. If you purchase a license package like the Get Outdoors or the Fish Washington, the endorsement actually does come with it, but you have to add the catch record card document to your license bundle. So if you purchase online, you'll have to click the little square that says add catch record card. And I don't know exactly how that works if you're purchasing through the app. But if you're purchasing at a dealer, you want to make sure that you want to add the catch record card, the Puget Sound catch record card to your package license. It doesn't come at any additional cost. You just have to
Correct.
request it. Yeah. It used to be that they just printed them out all. They would just print out all the licenses. But what ended up happening is we had a lot of people that were not reporting catch because they never actually went crabbing, and they had no intention of ever going crabbing, even though they had the license. So
And there's an administrative penalty for not reporting your catch on crab, not so on salmon or the other species, but there is. So if you fail to report your catch, you'll get an extra charge when you purchase the endorsement the next season.
yeah, so just ask for it and they'll give it to you.
Good to know. What type of weights would you recommend that don't impact water quality or degrade?
That's a good question. Quite honestly, in the past, I've used those bricks with holes in them and used them in the corners of the crab traps. I think they're probably the least impactful. At least they don't contribute to a lot of the plastics pollution and such. The other ideas I have usually involve plastic. They're usually weights like this that have a plastic coating or PVC filled with sand, or there's other ways, but a lot of them utilize plastic. But at least with the bricks wired into the corners, that seems to be like the most environmentally favorable and less messy. Bare rebar will mess up your boat if you have a white boat and there's rust everywhere.
Do you have any reservations about putting your phone number on the buoy? I think it's a good idea.
It is not required, but a lot of people do. And quite honestly, those people who do are probably more likely to be notified either by ourselves or by the general public that, hey, I saw your crab trap and it seems to be in an odd location. Here's where it is. And they can call you up. A lot of traps probably get returned that way.
How long should traps be out in the water for? Is there best practice?
Honestly, in the locations where I crab, which I'm not divulging here, for various reasons, I am one of those people. An hour to a 2 hour soak early in the season is all you need to get a limit. That's not always the case in every, like, some of the colors down in marine areas 11 or 10. probably not having that kind of success with short soaks. But the further north you go, the more likely that you'll be able to do that, and you'll just be sorting out, the best from your pot to keep.
What size weights for trapdoors so they don't float open do you recommend?
There's different things that I've seen done on the trapdoors. Probably the most common is, I hate to say it, lead fishing weights. The kind that's like the worm uh, that you can wrap around the gates. I haven't tried or even had to do it in the locations that I fished. So that's a good question about what would be the best weights to clip on those doors. Um, you could probably figure out something, and you could probably attach it with standard wire. Yeah.
That was a good question. I actually looked it up while we were
Okay.
talking, and online they say rubber core sinkers also might work. So,
Oh, there you go.
Mhm.
um, do crabs care if my square trap has rust? Not asking about how rust affects the functionality, just curious if it will somehow deter the crabs through scent, taste, or feel.
It does not appear to be the case. Generally, I can say that I use the square folding style. They are not new, and they catch crab just fine. At some point, I'll have to retire them, but yeah,
Mhm.
they seem to work just fine.
Yeah.
How do you decide the amount of weight? I know you said depending on where you fish, but what is the fundamental principle?
That is a great question. For example, when Marine Area 13 was open, the Nisqually River Delta could be fished. I would not suggest using anything other than a standard commercial crab pot for that area, just because the amount of weight, 50, 60-pound crab trap, is probably necessary there for the strength of the currents that you experience. If you were up in Port Susan, you could get away with 10 to 15 pounds added to a folding trap just fine. And a big commercial crab trap in many ways would be overkill. So it's really hard to say. Uh, there's so many different locations with different current profiles that if there's a chance that the current will be strong and or there's a lot of debris floating by, I would add more weight to the trap.
Awesome. This is our last question. Is there a better time of day or tide to set the crab pot?
That is a good question. What I have found myself is particularly around deltas and estuaries, there are often carved channels that crab uses highways to go in and out and feed on the in the intertidal zone. So I would personally, I would like to set my pot near those channels on an incoming tide, and hopefully get some of those travelers lured to the bait and captured. Uh, and then be careful not to put your tunnel doors in alignment with the channel. Otherwise, they'll fly open with the current. Sort of align them perpendicular or off at angles to that channel. That's my main concern. And I always start shallower, particularly early in the season, because crab have been mating in the shallows early in the season. But as the year gets deeper into the season, into winter, I find the shallow areas get hit hard, so you have to explore different depths. So that's more of a depth thing, not a timing thing. And crab are very active at night, so um, you can't work your crab pots at night for thievery purposes. 1 hour before official sunrise to 1 hour after official sunset. But if you're crabbing from a pier with a ring net or waiting for crab, that can be very successful.
Awesome. We actually did have one last question come in. When clamming is restricted due to red tide, would using those clams for bait be okay?
Caitlin, you want to answer this one? I can chime in too.
Yeah. Gosh, I don't know if I know the answer to that, but I do know that crab does not, I guess, biosynthesize the PSP and the toxins in the same way that a bivalve does. So I think the risk of it getting into the crab and the crab meat is lower. That being said, I think it's still probably risky. So I don't know if I would recommend that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I do know the Department of Health uh, because crab, when they do concentrate any of that toxin, which is to a much lesser degree than filter feed or bivalve shellfish, they do so in the crab guts or crab butter, they call it.
Yeah.
You know, the part that some people clean before they cook. Department of Health suggests to everyone that anything health-wise that is bad is in that crab butter or the guts, and they recommend cleaning the crab before you cook them. And
Mhm.
that's what I do now. So now the devil's advocate there is some people say that it adversely affects the flavor, but you want to be
Mhm.
healthy or you want to have more flavor. I don't know.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're all done with questions, so I guess we can just wrap up. Thank you, Dawn and Caitlin, so much for your expertise and joining us tonight. And thank everyone else for joining us. And I just want to wish you a responsible and successful crabbing season. So,
Yes. Thanks so much to everyone. And if you have any feedback during the season, I think one of our last slides mentioned that you can provide it to psrecreationalcrab@dfw.wa.gov.
Mhm.
And we'll see the feedback and we appreciate anything you have. Thanks
Yep.
so much.
awesome. And
Thank
this will be
you.
recorded
All right.
and
Thank
all
you.
on
And it's
YouTube.
recorded. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you both.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.